Hey, this is Paul from the Techno Funk Boy, and today we are here for a very important purpose. We are here to defend Final Fantasy IV from the heathens. If you are... I'm actually recording this for two separate things today, and so you are either seeing this on the YouTube channel or in the Backlog Breakdown, one of the bite-sized episodes in podcast form. If you're seeing me on one, I really encourage you to go to the other one. If you are a fan of the Backlog Breakdown podcast, please do go over to YouTube and check out the Techno Funk Boy channel. I do a lot of videos on Dungeons and Dragons and retro video games, mostly video game music. And we're going to get to that, but we're actually going to be talking about a particular game, Final Fantasy IV, in this episode. If you are catching me on YouTube, despite the fact that I am going to be responding to things that were said on the Backlog Breakdown, I actually really do recommend this show. It's one of my favorite podcasts, and it's actually part of the network that I'm a part of, the Play Well Network, or one of the Ponecasts. And I was a fan of this podcast well before we made the network, and so this is not just an in-house advertisement, but I really do love this show, and all of this is done in good fun. But Josh, in a recent episode, they were culling their top 100 games of all time, and Josh suggested the removal of Final Fantasy IV, and mentioned in the podcast that this was going to make Paul upset. That's me. And it did. and so I let him know that I was going to be doing this and that I would be submitting it for a bite-sized. He is if you are hearing this on the Backlog Breakdown feed, then he's a man of his word. If it's not there, then we all know what happened, and he is probably hiding in shame right here for daring to suggest such a thing. If you are watching on YouTube, or if you followed my channel, the stuff behind me, I didn't just put this up for this video. Now, I did change into my Kane t-shirt for this video, but behind me I have all of the playable characters from Final Fantasy IV on the wall behind me. I made those with perlers. I also have a scroll, one of my favorite images inspired by the game. It is an image of Cecil and Kane on the deck of an airship, possibly from the very first scene, because we do see it is Dark Cecil in the image. I love that image. I am a Final Fantasy IV fanatic, and it has remained one of my very favorite games since I bought it new on SNES back in the day. I should have grabbed it. It is somewhere over here. I do still have the cart. But Josh laid out a little bit of a case on why he thought this, and to his credit, he did say he very much enjoyed the game. He just didn't think it belonged on that list. And so I'm going to respond to a couple of things, and I'm going to point out a few things that I believe Final Fantasy IV does better than the other Final Fantasy games, and really any of the other JRPGs. So one of the things that Josh mentioned was just really a preference thing, and that was with grinding. If grinding, modern games have cut down on grinding quite a bit, but if you do not enjoy grinding, you are not going to enjoy the first couple of decades of JRPGs. I'm sorry. That being said, if you really do want to play this game and don't like grinding, there are a few ways that you can very sneakily severely cut down your grinding time. The way I prefer, there are a few places, but the way I prefer is actually on Mount Ordeals, and this is after the transformation of Cecil. And just as a warning, there will be spoilers here if you have not played the game. we will be hitting on some spoilers, but after the transformation, Cecil is now kind of has this power, this holy power to him, and that makes the undead creatures on the mountains, it makes it very difficult for them to hit him, and it makes him very easy for him to hit them. And so after you gain a few levels, you can actually kill off the other members of the party and just grind by yourself, and they will barely hurt you, especially as you just start gaining levels and gaining levels and gaining levels. And the good thing is just the way the game is set up, is that Rydia, Rosa, and Kane will also gain levels, because when they're not in the party, they gain experience along with Cecil, and so they will gain levels even though they're not there. And so by the time you get to Edge, he has a starting level that he's set at. But everybody else will be super buff as they come back to the party if you just spend a little time there, and that will kind of pretty much eliminate the rest of the game grind wise. And so that's when I go back through, that's where I do my grind. But that is a preference thing, and I'm not going to sit here and tell people that they're wrong for not liking grinding. That's fine. I totally get it. I started learning how to grind in the original Dragon Warrior, and so it is actually something that relaxes me, and so I'm not going to sit here and tell people that they shouldn't do that. The second thing you mentioned, though, is a real criticism of Final Fantasy IV, and one that I, to an extent, agree with, and that is the repetitive cycle of characters dying and coming back. Now, I don't. It's not as bad as I think Josh was saying it was. There is a scene where a Leviathan pops up out of the water and crashes your ship. I'm really wondering if this is what he's referring to for some of these supposed deaths, but I don't count those. I don't know that anybody ever thought that those characters died. You know what I mean? I don't think that was ever I don't think you were ever supposed to think that all those characters were dead. The point of that was to get Cecil all by himself on the coast right next to Mysidia, so that he had to go crawling back to the very people that he had physically harmed, some of them killed, and stolen from earlier in the game in repentance. And that was setting up his great transformation that we're going to get to soon. That being said, there are 5 other characters who die in the game, and only one of them actually dies. And I wholeheartedly agree that this is a weakness in the game. I don't think is weakness as Josh was mentioning, and I think that we agree on where it works. And so let's kind of go through these. There's 4 scenes, 5 characters. First one is the twins in Baron Castle. The second one is Tella, and then there's Sid, and there's Yang. Yang locks himself in the tower control room to blow it up. Sid, and this is the most egregious one. Sid jumps out of the airship holding a bomb to blow up other airships and somehow survives. I do consider that a weakness in the game. So Sid and Yang happen at close to the same period, and in the two of these two deaths are really at a point in the game where you were, ever since Mount Ordeals, you have been gaining momentum and gaining strength, and really things were starting to come together. But we hit this point in the game where your plans start falling apart. And there's a lot of events in this area that show this, and those two supposed deaths are part of that experience. I played this when I played this again without the level grinding in there. I played this whole segment in one sitting, And the impact of it was very, very great to me, because it's supposed to make you feel like you're starting to lose, and it did. And I knew these characters weren't dead, but it still made me feel that way. Now they both come back, and it's kind of anticlimactic because neither one of them really do much of anything once they come back. And so I don't necessarily think they should have come back. I've been on the record in my old podcast of saying that I think the final party should have had Yang instead of Edge. And this was the other, I'm going to go on a diversion. The other major weakness of the game for me was Edge. Not that I didn't like him. I actually love him. But you first get him. He's the last character, the last super major important character to be introduced in the game, and he comes at a time where things are really ramping up for the end. You know, you got a lot more to do, but you feel like you're in the end game now, and Edge is really trying to bring in some really emotional backstory and situations there that at that point of the game I wasn't really ready for. Whereas Yang, we knew enough about that, he we already know him. He could have added some more of that story. And so I did think that Yang should have been in the final party instead of Edge, or Edge had been introduced a lot earlier in the game. So back to the deaths and all that. Those were the two deaths that, or at least the deaths were. I think the deaths hit home enough. They did what they were supposed to do, and just added to that feeling of this is not going well, guys. This is not going well. But the returns did not hit hard. Where these deaths really hit is Tella and the twins. Now we'll hit the twins first, because it happens first. And this was such an amazing, powerful scene, because first of all, just that moment where the walls are literally coming in on you, and the two twins voluntarily turn themselves to stone to push back the walls and letting you out was. And then there's this moment of this mournful music, and the other character's just standing there for a minute. And as a player going through it the first time, you're like, okay, what do we have? What can we do to fix this? And nothing works. And you keep going through the game because you're pretty sure they're not actually dead. They're just stone. They just turned themselves to stone. It's fine. And so you go about, and you're like, okay, surely around the next corner, surely there's going to be a cure. And so there's rumors going around the playground of oh, well, maybe if we find a tail, then we can trade that for a cure. Something. And they do return to the game, but they return so late into the game that it really is that kind of, it's to the point where you think that you're starting to think maybe they're actually gone. Maybe that was it. And I think that's why that one hits so hard. And works so well. But they're not dead, and they do come back at the end. Tella's actually dead. And Tella is great because his story arc is truly this, truly tragic. And by tragic, I mean in the old-fashioned use of the term, like when Shakespeare wrote a tragedy. A tragedy is not just something bad that happens. A tragedy is where a character in their flaws brings about their own destruction. Okay? So when you read Shakespeare, when it's talking about a tragedy, this is what he's talking about. That it's the character's hubris or something like that really brings about his destruction. Tella is like that. Tella's need for vengeance is what brings him down. And it's such an incredible scene because he's first being fueled by his vengeance to do things that he had not been able to do, to reach a level of power that he thought impossible, and to accomplish it and to exceed his own limitations. That vengeance is propelling him to fight Golbez solo. But it's too much. It's too much for him. And that's what makes his death such a great, truly tragic moment. And Tella, one of my favorite characters in video games, and in the fact that Tella dies dead. That's what does that switch in our head that maybe Yang isn't coming back and maybe Sid isn't coming back. And toward the end of the game, when you've tried and you've looked everywhere for a way to save Palam and Porum, maybe it's not going to happen, and this is the first in a string of Final Fantasy games taking out a hero, and like everybody felt the punch in the gut in number 7 when it happened to Eris, and this is the one that punched me in the gut was Tella, and so yeah, that's all in all, I think that's actually a good criticism, but the character deaths bring so much more to the story and actually provide two of the most emotionally impactful moments of the game, and so I don't want to say that the repetition of death and rebirth is a downer on the game, because character deaths is actually one of the highlights of the game, but I do think that particularly Sid and Yang are one of the weaker points of the game. But let's talk about what this game gets right, because it does so much so well that my puny little complaints about like Edge and a couple of character deaths just pale in comparison to what this game accomplishes. First of all, Cecil remains my favorite character in any Final Fantasy game, and very probably my favorite character in video game history. When we first meet him, he's being torn up by his own actions, and he is lost as to what to do, and questioning these things only brings more heartache and more problems for him. And this is not new, but what they do with them is extraordinary. You immediately get put on a path of growth and redemption, and the path to growth is not the obvious one, and it's symbolized by the armor and swords that he finds. You're gonna notice as you get weapons and armor that the names of these armor just keep getting darker. And this is a symbol of Cecil wanting to do the right thing, but at the same time going about it the only way that he knows how, and the only way that is not going to work, through darkness. And so what he's trying to do at the beginning of the day is to be good by darking. Is that a word? Darking the darkness. And that leaves him alone on the beach by Mysidia. And he's told then that you're going the complete wrong direction. It's really interesting. It's really cool that Cecil begins at level 10 in this game, because he's already experienced. He's already a commander. He's done so much. He's so strong already. But what they're telling him is, you have to give up all of that. You have to give up that really awesome sword that will cause enemies to swoon if you don't kill them right away, so you can one-shot those zoos in the field. You have to give that up. You have to give up all the levels you gained. You have to give up your armor. And you're going to be left with a shirt on at level 1 at the end of this. Cecil is forced, and this is fairly soon in the game, Cecil is forced to give up everything in this act of repentance to be redeemed. And in that act, he becomes the paladin that we know. And in the last trial, he has to face his dark self. And we've seen this trope in video games too, haven't we? You know, of Dark Link and stuff like that. But it has never been done like this. That is one of my very favorite scenes in video game history. Is on the top of Mount Ordeals when Cecil faces himself, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful scene. And what emerges is Paladin Cecil is everything that we want in a hero, you know? Is that he has his flaws, but he has overcome them. He has risen above them. He has become a great leader. He has become a righteous leader. He has become more kind, more compassionate, and it's exciting to follow him. Rydia is my favorite female character in Final Fantasy history, and she goes through a similar change. But hers is a coming of age story and not a fun one. But we first see her when Cecil has literally killed her mom, and her learning to trust, to accept that, you know, that he had done it unknowingly, to forgive him of that, and to grow past her grief. She's taken off screen and aged magically, because she's in the world of the Eidolons, the summoning monsters, where time flows differently, and so she returns as no longer a child but a young woman, and she has learned her own compassion. She has learned forgiveness. She has learned power, and her dramatic entrance when everything is lost to Golbez and Tella's dead, and she comes in and throwing spells like a nobody's business. I really like grinding, because if you grind Cecil up to level 60, then she should, or a little bit above, then she should come back as level 62. And so she can come in and you can actually cast Medio in that battle, and it's glorious. It's glorious, because it's like, oh, Tella, you thought this was impossible? Watch. It's so much fun. Kain. Kain is one of my favorite characters because he is on the same road as Cecil, but without the real repentance, without the real redemption. And that makes him susceptible to Golbez's mind control. And he keeps twisting this way and that. And at the end of the game, we find him on Mount Ordeals trying to find that peace that Cecil has found and not trusting himself until he does. By the way, that plot is resolved in the after years, and a lot of people don't like that game. I actually do like the game, and it's very clunky. It's not as good, nearly as good as this game. But Kain's plot in that game is spectacular. It is so good, so good. The music, Because look, Uematsu just does magnificent music, and I'm going to put in this video. I'm going to throw some of the remixes that Techno Funk Boy has done of Final Fantasy music in the background here that you can find everywhere. It's available everywhere. But the music is spectacular. And Uematsu's music is always great, but this game is way up there on soundtrack. It is, if it's not the best, then it's top 3, easy. Some of the themes are so moving and so spectacular that they really drive the scenes. Something else that I think we overlook is this is one of the last games for a while. I'm trying to think of when they kind of brought back the distinction between characters. But this is, for a long time, they're not going to have another Final Fantasy game where each character is bringing a certain specialty into the fight. You know, in Final Fantasy V, you have jobs. And the espers in Final Fantasy VI make it so everybody can pretty much do everything by the end of the game, and so what does it really matter? But in here, the members of your current party are going to dictate how you fight that fight, and that makes it like sometimes difficult, like on Mount Ordeals when you have Cecil and a bunch of wimpy magic users, you know, who can lay down some damage, but they're kind of weak. And so when you get to the last battle, it's not like the last battle in Final Fantasy VI where you're like Ultima. No, it's like, okay, it's Edge. We got to throw something. Rydia, let's get some. Let's summon something or do some black magic. Oh, it's Rose's turn. Got to make sure that Cecil's berserk or get healing on the party. Kain, get into the air. Oh, love that about Kain, by the way. You know, that he's up in the air a lot, which causes him to miss a lot of damage. But when he comes down, it's so satisfying. Great stuff. And so that really kind of makes you think through your party and how you want your party to act in these things. Golbez, Golbez is a fantastic villain. It is one of those Darth Vader things where he's not the real villain after all, and the real villain does not have that kind of emotional impact like a Kefka does when you're following Kefka the entire time, or like Exdeath in Final Fantasy V when you just hate that guy so much and you want to kill him. But Golbez up until that end is just a really great villain. Last thing I want to mention is the dungeons, because when you're playing a JRPG and there's so many dungeons and there's so many things, it's very easy to get them all kind of mixed up in your mind. But the dungeons in this game are distinct. And they have a different flow to them, and they have a different look to them. And like when you come down, your first dungeon is that kind of mysterious, kind of creepy, cave of mist, and you're not sure what's going on. You got to go. You're going to go to the really dry den of the antlion, where there's so many kind of bug type monsters, or go up on Mount Hobbs where it's just kind of more of a mountain thing. I forgot the waterway, which you're literally going off the edge of a waterfall, which is a terrible way to get between kingdoms, and somebody should have fixed that a long time ago. But these areas have distinct feels to them, and in so many of them that you can take a glance at and know where people are in the story, just based on the personality of the dungeons, which I just absolutely love. So I've gone on for 30 minutes now, which makes a terrible video and a terrible bite size. If you have stuck with me so long, thank you. If you find me on YouTube, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube or another video service, we're actually on Rumble now, and so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That means a lot to me. And if you're watching on the video version, head over to the Backlog Breakdown. I really do love those guys, and even I will probably still love them if they make the decision to cut Final Fantasy IV, but it will be harder. It's just gonna be harder. Josh, you are Spoony Bard. I'm sorry. You Spoony Bard. We'll see y'all later.